All right, let's talk about Syria here for a moment. And if you think back, you will remember last summer, what we now know, or is reported to be actually, an off-script remark that the president made at a briefing having to do with what our approach would be to the growing carnage that was being laid out in Syria. Here's what the president said that some say has now gotten him in trouble. This is last summer.
We have been very clear to the Assad regime, but also to other players on the ground, that a red line for us is we start seeing a whole bunch of chemical weapons moving around or being utilized. That would change my calculus. That would change my equation.
So that is the moment that happened in August. Kirsten Powers is a columnist for the Daily Beast and a Fox News contributor. Rich Lowry is editor of the National Review and a Fox News contributor as well. What we're now learning about that comment, which was, it was a response to a question, that's why it was off script, but that it was not sort of discussed, that administration officials were taken aback when they heard him say that, because they knew what has now happened, that it was going to box him in a bit on that red line issue. Rich?
It's astonishing. I mean, you can't be the President of the United States and go out there and use the very loaded phrase red line without having a very specific purpose in mind and a very specific response if someone actually crosses the red line. But he apparently just went out there and said this. I mean, White House officials are all but saying it was a gaffe. But, you know, he repeated it, and other people in the administration repeated it. Now, the initial statement had that qualifier, that very technical qualifier, a whole bunch.
Right.
But in subsequent statements, they left the qualifier out. So this is really appalling, because it exposes the undermines the credibility of the United States in the starkest way possible when very dangerous people around the world take notice of this kind of thing, including Iran.
Yeah, and a big picture question for you, Kirsten. We were talking about this morning in terms of, you know, there was so much talk about the Bush doctrine, you know, what it was, right? So what is the Obama doctrine? Because you look at the action that was taken in Libya, and then you look at Syria and what the president has said about Syria, and what we've been promised was the impending fall of Assad in Syria for such a long time. What's the motive here? Where are we going?
Well, I think that, you know, in terms of Libya versus Syria, the Obama administration would argue that they aren't the same, because they felt that in the situation of Libya that it was easier to identify who the rebels were versus in Syria. I don't necessarily agree with that, and I actually oppose the Libya intervention, but I think that would be their fundamental argument. And look, Rich is right on, you know, the president cannot come out and, you know, any president cannot come out and make the kind of comment that Obama made. The idea that he would make it off the cuff is very disturbing, because people are looking at him, and the New Yorker was reporting that, you know, that they think Assad is actually testing Obama, testing his resolve. And so for the president to come out and say this and not to have a plan ready to go if that line is crossed is sending a very bad message to the world.
Well, it's said that there's only one other country, Rich, that does not want to see Assad fall, and that's Iran. They have to be watching our moves very closely here as well. When you're saying one thing and not following through on it, that has to strengthen their hand as well, I would think. Yeah,
and of course, especially because the president has set out what appear to be red lines with Iran and made similar sort of declarative statements. So obviously the logical conclusion is he may mean those just as little as he meant the red line on Syria.
So, Kirsten, where does he go from here? You know, and if his argument is weakened in terms of his international credibility, and, you know, you think back to the original statements of candidate Obama and then President Obama wanting to improve our relationships around the world, that notion is brought into question when you see how this is being handled.
Yeah. Look, there are no easy answers on Syria. It's not something that I think is easily solved. But like I said, if the president is going to come out and say that there's a red line that can't be crossed, I really don't think he can walk that back, unfortunately. And I think, and frankly, there should be a red line that can't be crossed. And a chemical weapon seems to be certainly, a good red line to have. But I think that there has to be some sort of response. Otherwise, it is just, no one will listen to anything the president says in the future.
You know, a lot of this seems to have been a miscalculation of Assad, Rich, because there was a lot of feeling that he was about to fall, and the president probably thought he was never going to get to this red line because he was going to be gone in a matter of weeks or months.
Yeah, and a miscalculation about Assad from the very beginning in the most flagrant ways. I mean, at the beginning, the administration thought he was a great reformer and someone who could be worked with, and then they had this very wishful belief that he would fall easily and quickly. I understand the wishfulness. One, it's a product of you really want the guy to go. Two, it's a product of wishing that he'll go without you having to actually do anything. Yeah. And clearly that's not the case. Kirsten's right, there are no great options here, but clearly I think you should try to arm the more moderate and reasonable elements of the opposition, although that would have been easier a year and a half ago before the opposition became so much more radicalized.
As Kirsten's point, in Libya, that action was done at a time when the rebels were more clearly defined, and now that doesn't seem to be the case. They seem to have a lot of al-Qaeda influence, which makes this very tricky. Thanks to you both. Good to talk to you this morning. Kirsten and Rich, we'll see you soon.
Thanks very much.